The morning Daniel Pierce's tractor got stuck in his own field, sunk to the axles in dust that looked like soil but had the texture of ash. Margaret Yates was turning her compost with a pitchfork, humming. By noon, the county extension office had confirmed what she'd been saying for 3 years. His ground was biologically dead. 0 earthworms per cubic foot. No fungi. No bacteria worth measuring. His 1,000 acres of Missouri bottomland had become sterile as concrete. Her half-acre garden, separated from his operation by a sagging fence and 15 years of contempt, was exploding with life. It had started 38 months earlier, on an October morning when Margaret backed her pickup to the fence line and began unloading 5-gallon buckets. Daniel appeared within minutes, arms crossed over his Pioneer seed cap. What's all this? Compost system. She dumped coffee grounds from the cafe in town, vegetable scraps from the grocery, spoiled hay from the Henderson stable. The pile steamed in the cool air. That's disgusting. It's soil building. It's trash. And it smells. He gestured at his pristine fields, chemically managed to perfection. Some of us run professional operations, Margaret. This is a farming community, not a garbage dump. She stabbed the pitchfork into the pile. This is farming, Daniel. What you do is chemistry. His jaw tightened. My yields speak for themselves. For now. He stomped back to his house, the sprawling ranch style he'd built after his third 200-bushel corn year. His wife Linda had stopped waving to Margaret around the same time the flagstone patio went in. Margaret's husband had died 7 years ago. Heart attack at 51, pitching hay. The farm had been his family's, 60 acres that Daniel's grandfather had tried to buy 4 times. When Margaret kept it running alone, kept the garden producing, Daniel took it as a personal insult to modern agriculture. At the feed store that week, he made sure his voice carried. Margaret Yates has got a rotting mess on her back property. Health department should check that out. It's compost, Margaret said from the next aisle. It's disgusting. She came around the corner, 71 years old, white hair pulled back, dirt under her fingernails. You know what's disgusting? Soil that can't grow a weed without synthetic nitrogen. The store went quiet. Daniel's face reddened. My soil tests are perfect. Every nutrient dialed in exactly right. Test for life lately? Or just NPK? This is why women shouldn't. He caught himself, but the words hung there. Margaret bought her chicken feed and left. She'd grown up in the Ozark Hills when women's work meant 40 acres of tobacco and a milk cow. Her mother had taught her about soil the way some mothers taught piano, as a language, a living conversation. Modern farming had forgotten how to listen. She expanded the compost operation. Horse manure from 3 stables. Autumn leaves from the town park. Cardboard from the grocery. She layered, watered, turned, monitored temperature. The pile became piles, plural, each one a controlled biological explosion. Daniel called the county health department. The inspector, a tired man named Rodriguez, came out on a Wednesday. Ma'am, we got a complaint about improper waste management. Margaret walked him to the composting area. Does this look improper? He examined the 3-bin system, the temperature logs, the finished product. Crumbled a handful, smells like a forest floor. The board dismissed the complaint. Linda Pierce stopped her at the post office in December. Margaret, Daniel's just concerned about property values. He's concerned that I'm doing something different and won't apologize for it. You don't understand the pressure he's under. Input costs, commodity prices. I understand he's on a treadmill. More chemicals to fix problems caused by chemicals. Linda's expression hardened. Not everyone can run a tiny garden and pretend it's farming. Margaret watched her leave, the words stinging despite herself. Her plot was small. She was alone. She'd never operated Daniel's scale. But she knew something he'd forgotten. Spring came hard and wet. Margaret's garden took the transplants like it had been waiting for them. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, everything rooted deep in soil that was more alive than it had been in 50 years. Daniel planted corn, same as always. His fields looked perfect from the road. Even, measured, controlled. Margaret watched the earthworms in her beds. Counted them sometimes, just to remind herself she wasn't crazy. 50, 60 per square foot. The compost had rebuilt the underground universe. At the cafe, she overheard Daniel talking to his crop consultant. Might reduce inputs this year. Soil's testing so high, I don't need the usual amounts. She said nothing, just drank her coffee and left. By June, the differences were visible to anyone paying attention. The drought started subtly, a dry May, then a June where the rains that usually swept across the Missouri River Valley just stopped. By the first week of July, the Weather Service was using phrases like flash drought and unprecedented soil moisture deficit. Margaret's garden didn't notice. She watered once a week, deeply, and the soil held it like a sponge. The compost she'd worked in, 3 seasons of it now, layers of organic matter, had transformed the ground into something resilient. The earthworms and fungi had built highways for water, created aggregates that held moisture against all odds. Her tomatoes sprawled heavy and dark green. Peppers hung thick on the branches. The squash vines spread like they were competing for territory. Daniel's corn, 40 acres of it visible from her kitchen window, started to struggle. First the color shifted, that deep green fading to something yellowish, stressed. Then the leaves began to curl, the plants trying to conserve moisture that wasn't there. His field had perfect chemistry, but no life, no organic matter to hold water, no biological network to help plants cope. She saw him out there at dawn and dusk, walking the rows, hands on his hips in the universal posture of a farmer watching profits evaporate. At the co-op, the talk was all drought strategy. Irrigation systems maxed out. Crop insurance adjusters making appointments. Daniel stood at the counter, his voice carrying that edge of controlled panic. Thinking about a rescue nitrogen application. Push them through. The agronomist, Jim Sorensen, shook his head. Dan, I don't think more nitrogen's your answer. The roots can't access what you've already applied. So what, I just watch it die? You could try. Jim stopped himself. What? Maybe talk to Margaret Yates. The silence was profound. Daniel's laugh was harsh. The compost lady? Are you serious? Her garden looks like she's got irrigation running 24/7. She doesn't. I drove by. Something she's doing is working. Yeah, on a half-acre plot. Not a real operation. Margaret was 2 miles over, buying tomato steaks. She'd stopped being surprised by Daniel's dismissiveness. Some men would rather fail than learn from a woman, especially a woman who'd been right all along. But Jim persisted. Your soil organic matter is 1.2%, Dan. Hers is probably 5, maybe 6. That's the difference between a sponge and a stone. I follow the recommendations. Every test, every application, following recommendations for yield, not for resilience. There's a difference. Daniel left without buying anything. The drought deepened. Margaret's phone started ringing. Other gardeners, small farmers, asking what she was doing. She invited them over, walked them through her system, showed them the compost operation that Daniel had called disgusting, explained the biology, the patience required. It's a 3-year build, she told them. Minimum. You can't fix dead soil in 1 season. A younger farmer, Emma Kruger, asked the question others were thinking. What about someone like Pierce? Could he recover? If he wanted to. But he'd have to admit his approach killed what he was trying to feed. The county extension agent, Sarah Moss, called in early August. Margaret, would you be willing to do a soil test comparison? For educational purposes. Compare to what? Daniel Pierce's operation. He's interested in seeing the biological differences. Margaret doubted Daniel was interested so much as desperate, but she agreed. Sarah came out with her testing kit on a Thursday. They pulled samples from Margaret's main garden bed and from the edge of Daniel's cornfield. The contrast was visible before any lab work. Margaret's soil moved with life, studded with earthworm castings and white fungal threads. Daniel's soil was inert, lifeless particles that fell apart in the hand. The lab results came back in 4 days. Sarah called Margaret first. I've never seen numbers like yours outside of a native prairie restoration. Earthworms, fungi, bacteria. Everything's off the charts. Your soil is functionally alive. And Daniel's. A long pause. Biologically dead. 0 earthworms per cubic foot. Fungal biomass barely detectable. The chemicals have sterilized everything. Will you tell him? I'm required to. But Margaret, he's not going to take this well. Sarah was right. Daniel appeared at Margaret's fence line 3 days later. The soil report crumpled in his fist. His face was gray. This can't be right. Margaret was watering, the hose running slow and steady. It's right. 0 earthworms. It's not possible. I've been farming this ground for 30 years. You've been mining it for 30 years. There's a difference. His hand shook. Everything I did was by the book. Every recommendation, the book was wrong, Daniel. We're incomplete. It told you how to force yield, not how to build life. He looked at his cornfield, the plants stunted and struggling. Looked at her garden, lush and thriving. Something in his expression cracked. Can it be fixed? Margaret turned off the hose. This was the question she'd been waiting for, though she'd never thought he'd asked. Yes, but not quick, and not by doing what you've always done. How long? 3 years minimum to see real change. 5 to rebuild what you lost. He laughed bitterly. I'll be bankrupt by then. Not if you transition smart. Start with cover crops this fall. Reduce chemical inputs, way down. Let the biology start recovering. And just accept lower yields while my neighbors keep producing? Your neighbors are on the same treadmill you are. Eventually, everyone's soil dies. You're just seeing it first. He stared at the ground between them, at the fence that had marked the border between his contempt and her patience. I called your compost disgusting. You did. I was wrong. Margaret studied him, the defeated slump of his shoulders, the genuine horror in his face at what he'd done to his own land. Yes, she said. You were. The first delivery came on a Saturday in late August. Daniel's pickup backed up to Margaret's compost area, filled with spoiled silage from his feedlot. Where do you want it? He asked. Margaret pointed to the newest pile she'd started. Layer it with the leaves. 3 parts brown to 1 part green. He worked for 2 hours, unloading, spreading, learning. Didn't speak much. Linda drove by once, slowed, then kept going without stopping. By September, Daniel had converted 5 acres to cover crops, a mix of rye, vetch, and radishes that would winter kill and feed the soil. His crop consultant quit. His neighbor, Bill Hastings, made jokes at the grain elevator about Daniel going hippie. Daniel stopped going to the grain elevator. Instead, he showed up at Margaret's kitchen door twice a week, notebook in hand, asking questions. How to manage the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. When to turn. How to know when compost was finished. She taught him the way her mother had taught her. Through doing, through touching, through learning to read the soil's language. Why are you helping me? He asked in October, after she'd walked him through testing for compost maturity. After everything I said. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. Because the land doesn't care about our egos. It just wants to be treated right. His wife came to the fence in November. Margaret was pulling the last of the sweet potatoes, each one massive and perfect. Margaret, Linda's voice was quiet. I owe you an apology. For what specifically? There's a list. Linda's laugh was wet. All of it. The things I said. The things I believed. About your operation being small, being meaningless. Margaret brushed dirt from a sweet potato. It is small. But it's not meaningless. Daniel comes home different now. Lighter. Like he remembers why he started farming in the first place. He got lost in the numbers. Happens to a lot of people. He's planting 30 acres to cover crops this spring, converting a quarter of the operation to organic transition. The bank thinks he's crazy. The bank doesn't farm. Daniel does. Linda helped carry the sweet potato crates to the truck. Before she left, she turned back. Would you come to dinner sometime? I'd like to. We'd like to know you better. Margaret had eaten alone for 7 years. I'd like that. The winter was planting season. Daniel joined a regenerative agriculture group, started attending workshops, connected with farmers who were rebuilding what conventional agriculture had destroyed. He bought his first earthworm survey kit, started monitoring biology the way he'd once monitored only chemistry. In March, Sarah Moss from the Extension Office asked to document the transformation. This could be important, Margaret. Someone of Daniel's scale, making this transition, it could influence the whole region. Only if it works. It'll work. You know it will. Margaret did know. She'd seen soil come back before, had watched biology rebuild when given half a chance. But knowing and proving were different things. The spring planting was revolution disguised as farming. Daniel put in his cover crops, managed his reduced inputs, started his first serious compost operation on the far corner of his property. Margaret consulted, guided, occasionally told him he was overthinking. Soil's not complicated, she said. Feed it. Protect it. Give it time. By June, the differences were visible. The 5 acres he'd cover crop showed darker soil, better tilth. Earthworms appeared, not many, but some. The beginning of recovery. His 30 acres of transitioning ground struggled compared to his neighbor's conventional fields, but the plants were healthier, the roots deeper. Building foundation instead of forcing yield. The county agricultural newsletter ran a feature in July. Local farmer transitions to regenerative methods after soil crisis. The article was careful, technical, but the message was clear. Conventional management had failed. Something different was working. Daniel's phone started ringing. Other farmers asking questions. Some mocking, some genuine. He referred most of them to Margaret. She started hosting workshops. 15 people the first time, 30 the second. Her half-acre garden became a teaching laboratory. Proof that biology mattered more than chemistry. That patience produced results force never could. At the August workshop, Daniel stood up during the Q&A. I owe this woman an apology. A public one. He looked at Margaret. I called your methods disgusting. Called your operation meaningless. I was protecting my ego and my approach, and I nearly destroyed my own land doing it. The room was silent. My soil tested dead last year. Biologically dead, because I'd sterilized it chasing yield. Margaret tried to tell me. I wouldn't listen. I'm listening now. Someone started clapping. Then everyone. Margaret felt her throat tighten. She'd never wanted vindication. Exactly. Just wanted people to understand that the old knowledge still worked, that biology wasn't optional, that soil was alive, or it was nothing. That fall, Daniel's cover crops went in across 150 acres. His earthworm counts were up to 12 per cubic foot on his transitioning ground. His organic matter had climbed to 2.1%, not Margaret's numbers, but moving in the right direction. At the cafe in October, Bill Hastings sat down at their table. Margaret and Daniel had gotten into the habit of morning coffee and planning sessions. Y'all got room for one more in this soil cult? Bill asked. Daniel grinned. Margaret's the one you need to convince. Margaret looked at Bill, saw the genuine interest behind the joke. You ready to build compost piles and count earthworms? If it means my ground's still farmable in 10 years? Yeah. The movement grew. Not fast, but steady. The way soil itself built, layer by layer, season by season. Margaret's little operation became the center of something larger. Proof that scale didn't determine importance. That one woman's stubborn knowledge could shift a community's entire approach. Linda Pierce hosted Thanksgiving that year, insisted Margaret come. The table was full. Daniel's kids home from college. Neighbors who'd started their own regenerative transitions. Sarah from the extension office documenting the regional shift. During grace, Daniel added something unscripted. And thanks for Margaret Yates, who knew what she was doing when the rest of us didn't, and was patient enough to teach us anyway. Margaret looked around the table, at the community building itself the way soil built. Slowly, with patience, with attention to what mattered. Her compost piles were still turning. Her garden was mulched for winter. The earthworms were deep and safe, doing their work in the dark. She'd spent 3 years being right while being dismissed. Now she spent her days watching others learn what she'd always known. That soil was alive, that life could be rebuilt, that the old ways weren't old, just forgotten. Tomorrow there'd be more questions, more farmers wanting to learn. The work continued. The land responded. And Margaret, at 74, was finally being heard. Not because she'd argued louder, but because she'd simply kept doing the work until the truth grew obvious enough that even the loudest skeptics had to see it. The geese called from Daniel's new flock. He'd started integrating livestock after Margaret suggested it. The sounds carried across the fence line that no longer marked a border between contempt and knowledge, but between two different stages of the same understanding. Margaret Yates smiled and reached for the potatoes. The soil was healing. The community was learning. And she, as always, would be there tomorrow at dawn, hands in the dirt, proceeding forward with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never needed validation. Just time for the truth to grow.